Welcome to this session on Bossy or Better. I'm Lindley Craig, and I will be your guide through this NLP session on metaprograms. Metaprograms are the unconscious programming we have in our brains that run our lives. They've been developed over our entire lifetime with each experience we've been through, and have been influenced by those that we've modeled around us, as well as the culture in which we live. The problem is, most of us have no awareness that these programs exist, let alone how they are helping or hurting how we lead our lives. Do our metaprograms make us happy, or are they causing us real problems in our lives? So in this session, we are going to explore a metaprogram so that you can bring conscious awareness to the stuff that's unconscious. Once we make our programs conscious, then we can make choices as to which program we want to use and how we want to use it. By being flexible, we allow ourselves more freedom and ultimately more control over building a happy and prosperous life. So just for an overview of what this session is going to be like, we're first going to understand why we're learning about this particular metaprogram, which we casually entitled Bossy or Better. And we are going to explore what we need to know as well as how we're going to play with these metaprograms. And at the end, of course, I'll ask about what did you notice? So what did you learn? What did you find or discover within this session? So for me, the main reason I believe it's important for people to understand metaprograms is because they are normally at the heart of every conflict, every bad marriage, every unhappy employee, and every life that's going nowhere. I do a lot of coaching, so I get to see these metaprograms pop up in these people's lives that I'm coaching. The unconscious patterns of thinking, feeling, and doing can really mess up our world. And when we bring conscious awareness to our patterns, we find hope. We find connection. We find meaning in our lives that we've never had before. And I really think that's an important why. Today I coach someone who has a bunch of different metaprograms that he's unaware of that are causing stuff to happen that he does not like. We talked about just one of these today. It's the one you're learning about in this session. We talked about options versus procedures and how his world will change when he learns new ways of behavior. He wrote me in a taxi on the way to his next appointment, quote, "Thank you, Lindley. I really found today's session helpful and enjoyable, and I look forward to the next one!" Exclamation point. So for me, it's not about why do we learn metaprograms. It's why not? The first metaprogram that we are going to explore in this session is options. Have you ever had someone ask you where you wanted to go to dinner and then give you a list of choices? You might make a selection, but the other person keeps giving you suggestions. For people who are really option-oriented, it doesn't really matter that you said, "I want to go to the Mexican restaurant down on the river." They would continue to give you options as if suggesting there is a better option to your selection. Sometimes people try to make things better for no other reason than they need to have more options. The only drawback to this is too many options can make people feel anxious and create anxiety in life. And it can also cause something that's called decision fatigue. You see, we have a lot of things to make decisions on throughout the day. And for some people, they get fatigued in making decisions. So by the end of the day, if somebody says, what do you want for dinner, or where do you want to go and have a drink, they normally would respond something like, well, I don't care. Because they've come to the limit of the number of decisions that they're willing to make during that day. So for somebody who has a lot of options, they create decision fatigue for other people. Of course, having so many options also has an effect of creating anxiety and stress in an already stressful world. So for procedures, have you ever been to a Chinese restaurant? And it's very particular for Chinese restaurants. So maybe if you haven't been to one, you might not know what I'm talking about, but it's actually quite a strange phenomenon. But in a Chinese restaurant, if you go in, the table is set in a very specific way. And if you move something on the table, it's most likely that a staff member will come by and move it back. You can then move your chopsticks or perhaps the soy sauce or something and move it away again, and a staff member will come back and move it back. It's hysterical to watch. My husband and I do it on purpose just to see the staff come by and rearrange our table back to its original setting. The staff in the restaurant have been trained in a procedure, and they will follow it to a T. Now, too many procedures make people seem a little bossy. They come across as that they're ordering people around when all they're trying to do is create a little systematic processing in their lives. Now, in NLP, we can't talk about a program, of course, without talking about linguistics or language. Of course, it's Neuro Linguistic Programming. So we want to understand, how can we identify people who are options? Well, we've learned some ways already, but we can identify when someone's being option-oriented by the language that they use. So for somebody who is options-oriented, we would hear things like break the rules, alternatives, choices, expanding, possibility, opportunity, as well as, of course, options. We also hear things like, I thought it would be stimulating, interesting, a challenge. Or they'll say things like, I want more diversity. So anything more challenging, more stimulating, more diversity, more anything, this is the type of things that we hear an options-oriented person saying. People who are options-oriented also are motivated by opportunities, possibilities, and ways to do things differently. For them, there is always a better way. Now, don't get me wrong. Options people can create procedures, but they will have a difficulty actually following them. And if you give an options person a guaranteed way of making $1 million, they will improve on it. All right. So let's look at now the language or linguistics we would hear for somebody who's procedure-oriented. They would say things like first, then, after which, the right way, tried and true, steps, and of course, procedure. A procedures person would also say things like, well, I didn't choose this for myself. It happened this way. And then they would tell you a story. This is how it happened. They want to present to you the facts, and most often in a story or chronological way. And if you ask them the question why, they will answer by explaining how. So if you say something like, well, why are you in the job that you're in? They'll explain to you how they got to the job that they're in. Now, procedures people like to follow a set process. There is a right way and a wrong way to do things. Once their procedure is established, they will follow it over and over. Now, without a procedure, they will feel lost. And once started, of course, they must finish their procedure. Now, with everything in NLP, we look at things on a continuum. So on one end of the spectrum, you have options people. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have procedures people. And you need to kind of decide for yourself, are you more options oriented? Or are you more procedures oriented? Or are you just somewhere in between? Now, there is an exercise that you're going to do, and it is located on the page below so that you can download this particular exercise. In the first exercise, you're going to look at how to change an option into a procedure. So how can you have somebody who's really options oriented and help them to create something more systematic? So in this particular exercise, it's where are you going to go on holiday? And there's going to be a bunch of choices that are given to you, options. And we use a 4-step process to take something from an option into a procedure. Of course, we have a procedure for options. All right. So the first step is we're going to determine what are the actual options and what are their components. And by components, I mean, what are the things that are necessary or needed, or the details of each of those options that are important to that particular option. The next thing that we're going to do in step 2 is eliminate options that don't create a win-win situation between us and whoever we're speaking to automatically. So sometimes options are just thrown out just for the sake of having an option, but aren't really realistic options for either party, or perhaps maybe a team or a group that you're working with. So you want to eliminate those options straight away. Next, you want to negotiate how to solve objections to particular sets of options. So perhaps maybe option 3 is really good, but there's an objection in it. Is there a possibility of solving that objection so it can create a win-win for the entire group or for both parties? Lastly, you're going to decide on which option is best, create a plan of how to implement that option, and then when to follow up after the execution is already started. So those are the 4 steps that you use to turn an option into a procedure. Now, when you get done with that particular exercise, also understand that there are times that you want to turn options into procedures and times that you don't. One place that you would want to turn an option, or you don't want to turn an option into a procedure, is when you're brainstorming. In brainstorming, you just want to have a bunch of options come out without talking about how you would implement each option or talking about objections to each option. Brainstorming is brainstorming. It's about pulling all the options out of the hat instead of trying to analyze them one at a time as you go. So brainstorming, not a great place for changing options into procedures. Now, let me give you an example of a particular incident that I had when I was dealing with my husband about a situation where we had to turn an option into a procedure. So my husband had a friend coming in to Singapore, and they wanted to go out to dinner with us. And the thing that was a component of the discussion was that the people wanted to go someplace that was local, a local restaurant in Singapore. So, of course, I had placed out the option of one of the local restaurants. It's called Jumbo, and they serve a delicacy in Singapore, which is called pepper crab or chili crab. And so that's one of the options that I had presented to the table. And my husband had said, yes, that is an option. And then he proceeded to give another option. And that option was a place which is called the hawker stall called Lau Pa Sat. And he said we could go to Lau Pa Sat as well and sit in sort of the outside environment with the satay stalls and the smoke all around, and just enjoy the entire environment of being downtown in this, soaking up the entire environment of being in this very local establishment, which was fine, but I had some objections to it. Now, during this conversation, one of the problems that we had was my husband had more options than he was giving me at that time. He didn't tell me all of the options that he had. So therefore, when I brought up an objection to one of the options, he got really upset at me because of the fact that there were more options available that I wasn't considering. And he also thought that my objection was my own problem, not his. So what I had to do was take him back to the first part of the thing and start determining all the options and their components so that I had all of the options on the table. Literally, we did this over a table. And then I eliminated each option that didn't create a win-win for us automatically. Again, for my husband, he was just throwing out options because that's what he's going to do. And then we then were able to sit down and look at the actual options that were going to create a win-win, look at the objections to the option that I had originally, and then discuss on which option was best, then create a plan about how to go about doing it. So this is the procedure that we did to create, to solve a situation where my husband had all these options in his mind about what to do, but wasn't really making a decision about which one it was that he was going to do. Again, so sometimes, causes a little stress and anxiety when there's too many decisions to make. All right, so that is your first exercise. Now, in this second exercise, you're going to look at how do you turn procedures into options. 3-step process here. The first thing you're going to do is going to determine what part of your procedure is non-negotiable. So the second thing you're going to do is determine what can be modified, which could be the order or the sequence or the timing or the style or whatever it is, something that can be modified to create options. And then the third is to actually create 3 options that include the part that you don't want to change. So now I'm going to give you an example of how this actually works. I had a client who was told by his wife that he was really bossy. And so when he told me about this, I said, okay, can you give me an example? And he said, well, my wife is on vacation right now, and when she comes home, I want to have dinner with her. And so if I tell her that we're going to have dinner at 7:00 and we're going to have this wine and we're going to have this food, and she's going to get upset at me because I'm being bossy. And that's when I said to him, okay, so you want to have dinner with your wife. That's the non-negotiable part. And you want to have a certain dinner that you know that your wife is going to like. All of which he totally agreed with. Then I said, okay, so do you care, and is it non-negotiable when specifically you have dinner? He said, no, it doesn't matter. And I said, and so when your wife gets home, it doesn't matter if you have dinner first, or if she takes a shower first, or if you have a drink first, or whatever, but those things are okay to change around, but what you don't want to change is the fact that you're having dinner and what you're having for dinner. And he said yes. And I said, fine. So we have the part where we've determined the part that isn't negotiable. Then we determine what could be modified. And now we're going to create our 3 options. And I said to him, when your wife gets home, I want you to give her 3 options. The first option is that she can drop her bags, go take a shower, and then come and sit down and have dinner with you. Option 2 is that she can drop her bags, have a drink with you on the balcony, and then have dinner. Or option 3 is that you can have dinner straight away and she can then go take a shower and relax after she has dinner. So there were 3 options. He was a little bit reluctant, to say the least, that this was going to work. But when his wife got home and he provided her with the 3 options, she happily chose to sit on the balcony with him, have a glass of wine, and talk about her trip. The evening went so smoothly, he texted me later and said, "You are a miracle worker. I need to learn more." So this is what it's all about. So you can find that particular exercise below. Also, remember that there is an exception to all of our metaprogram rules here. There are times when we don't really want to negotiate our procedure. So in his particular case, my client's particular case, one of the things his wife didn't like was when he talked about seat belts in a car. And when he told them to put on their seat belts, she found he was bossy. So what I asked him to do was to explain to his wife, that whenever it came down to their lives and the safety of his wife and his children, there is no negotiation. It will be a procedure. And actually, because he stopped doing it in all other areas of his life, then she was perfectly happy with that particular procedure. So safety stuff, and then boundaries. So if you have specific boundaries in your life about how you want people to treat you, then there is not an option to going outside of that boundary. All right, so that's it for this particular session on Bossy or Better. You've learned a new metaprogram, options, or procedures. Now my question to you, of course, is what have you discovered? What have you noticed? What have you learned? You have the exercise below, so I hope you go ahead and practice that particular exercise of changing and being able to learn to flex between options and procedures along the continuum. That's it for this video session, and I will see you in the next one.